Shanti, you came to the UK in 1978 from Mumbai. You'd been studying art there, but originally from Gujarat. And it seems to me that you've carried the Indian subcontinent in your sort of heart and visual imagination all the way through your career. But you started out studying all kinds of painting, didn't you? Eastern, Western. You had to copy masterpieces from galleries. Tell me how you sort of honed this particular approach and this subject matter.
I think coming from village, I mentioned coming to Mumbai and having gone through 5 years painting in art school, GG School of Art. I think I was it's a beautiful art school, and I was trained kind of both like Eastern and Western painting approaches. And also we had studies, like Indian miniatures and Western, through the books, of course. We had no original painting available. So having studied all those, I came as a British Council scholar to study here. And that was a kind of very, almost like a shock to my system in one way, because we had no access to all these beautiful paintings. So I could spend so much time in museums and art galleries to looking at, National Gallery and, Tate. And it's wonderful to see the original. I also went to see some of the work in Amsterdam, like Van Gogh and, Rembrandt and so on. And that was really fascinating for me in that sense. And those years, and I had so much space in college studios. So I was working like 12 feet by 6 feet oil on canvas. There was still like a semi-figurative, and I think abstraction I did short, but I've tried to explore all different possibilities. But after I finished my scholarship in the Barhamshire School of Art for 2 years, of course I had to return back, as that was a part of the scholarship. And I was teaching in an art college in Mumbai. And unfortunately, I had to come back because I was married here, and so it was very a lot of complications, which was really difficult for me, because I never thought that I ever wanted to live here. So that was for me, it was very hard. If you decide that you want to live, then you make adjustment according to that psychologically as well. But then what happened, that I had no space, no studio. So I started from 12 feet, 6 feet to 12 inches, 6 inches, and sort of started experimenting work. And of course, I also went back to referring to Indian miniature, as well as some amazing work I always admired was like William Blake and El Greco, for example, Samuel Palmer. This generation of artists which really fascinated me. But also fascinated to see actually original of Vermeer, which I thought was massive, huge scale, and they were quite small size when you look at it. So it was really amazing in that sense. But having sort of experimenting, I really found a way of working out of my own mistakes, because I made a lot of mistakes in like working on paper, which I wanted to. During my scholarship, I also actually was traveling in Europe and America, and I really felt that watercolor historically hasn't really changed a great deal. Like oils and acrylic, you can see how transformation has been made, but watercolor I found is still pretty flowers and sweet landscape. And I wanted to shift that, and I wanted to also see the strength of color as well. Because see, oils and acrylic, when you make mistakes or something, you can paint it over. With watercolor, you cannot do that. But doing the other side of it is like painting over and over, which it's almost like injecting color into the paper, which gives amazing strength of color and at the same time luminosity. So what you're actually doing in watercolor, you are actually activating the surface of the paper, the texture paper, as well as the color, which you're not doing in oils and acrylic. You're only using as a base, either as a board or canvas. And that was wonderful thing for me, that it was almost like through my experimentation, it revealed to me, and I found this way it gave me strength of color and also the luminosity. And of course, figuration was always element in my work. So that's how I sort of arrive in this journey.
It's a very time-consuming process using watercolour with your technique.
It is time consuming, and but for me it's like a very meditative process, layering over color. Like sometimes you get 10-15 layers of color and you still, it's like going backward and forward. Sometimes some area works, the other area doesn't work, so you have to go back to it. But doing that, what you're doing is actually trying to get things together. Many times, when things are not working, then I cannot move the color, so I then use oil paint brushes in order to mix those colors. So mixing of the color also happens on the paper and not on the palette. Sometimes if you wanted a kind of orange color, then you paint yellow color and let it dry, and then you paint red color over it. So what it does is that you mix it on the paper itself with water. Sometimes I use blotting paper as well. Otherwise it takes even a longer time to dry. So.
And you've got a handy little hairdryer.
Exactly.
By your side
I never did, but that took me even longer. So I use hairdryer to dry it, so that once you paint one color, it has to dry. You cannot paint wet over wet. It will have no effect. But doing that, I think is really amazing. What you get as a surprise kind of colors. Somebody actually said your color is like a stained glass windows in the strength of color which you see.
Yeah. It does have that luminosity. But the subjects and the palette that you have is recognisably the same through those decades. Now there's a wonderful sense of inclusivity and representation, so that we are really embracing all of the skin colours that we have in this country, all of the experiences that we have in this country. But I would imagine when you were painting these very recognisably Indian faces and Indian sort of cultural scenes, it was slightly more unusual, a bit more radical in the 80s in London. Did you feel like a radical?
Well, I didn't really see in any that form, because I was mainly working really in order to what I wanted to achieve with my work, and I. Because I grew up in a village, almost remote village, which is not even a local map, so you can imagine, and very organic world as well. So we had no water tap or electricity or anything like that. And when the monsoon came, we swam in the mud. So, and it was a part. Your whole body was very much with the earth. Even I'll give you an example, which is like I used to take the cows and buffaloes to gaze in the field, and I had to carry a basket because we used to use cow dung for fertilizing in the field. So we piled the whole year and then spread it on the field. So sometimes if the animal has a diarrhea, I would have a basket, and that will, when I come home, the whole my body is full of dung. And that's really interesting in the sense how now, of course, that is being used as a beautician kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
So these organic elements, I think, all stayed with me. The color also stayed very similar in the sense like all the earth colors, the mud wall houses which I lived in with the red roof tiles. So I think these colors, as I think I mentioned earlier, was that I tried to use some greens and blues, and I did find quite difficult in order to deal with it. So
there was a real visceral reaction against using strong greens, which of course
indeed,
I noticed
absolutely.
you don't have in your paintings.
I painted over with the orange color or red color, but that gave me a beautiful shade of color. That's a wonderful thing about these kind of trial and errors, because the painting is never straightforward. You go, people think, oh, this looks so straight and simple. It's not like that. It's every painting is a challenge, but it's fascinating. It gives you so much pleasure as well, so much joy as well.
So you weren't so much thinking about how your works were being perceived, you were just simply being driven by your own impulses and imagination to create scenes that perhaps brought home the palette of your childhood home.
I think you see, the thing is, a lot of people who born in a big cosmopolitan cities, and they are influenced by so many different diverse. I didn't have that privilege. I grew up in a very remote place. All the earth what had given me in terms of color and texture as well. Because earlier when I was a kid, 10-year, they used to have weddings and festival. So they would whitewash mud wall houses, and they would ask me to decorate those walls. And I used to enjoy that, but of course there were no colors and brushes, so I used to climb on a neem tree, cut a thin branch of a neem tree, hammer at one end, make a brush. And my family were carpenters, so they used to use red color to mark on the wood. So I used only one color, red color, with a crude handmade brush, and decorate simple images like birds, animals, trees, and so on. So I think those texture, the paper, the fresco, like wall surfaces also was important. So you can see even this watercolor painting, you can see that surface is very vital for me, in not just the color.
And that sense of simplicity and is very visible in your landscapes, and symbolic sort of elemental figures and experiences. They're immensely atmospheric.
As I said, growing up with all the natural forces, the sun, the moon, the earth, the spiritual element runs within myself, and I think that is, I always believe that we all human beings are spiritual human beings, whether you think about it or whether you're aware about or whether you made any, is irrelevant. And I think that also runs, I use, initially I really didn't think about that when I was working, because it created a kind of form, like a dark area in my forehead, for example. But then I also became aware that is also, we all have intuitive energies. Sometimes we think, sometimes we don't, but it stays with us. And so I use as a symbolic, like a Shiva's third eye, for example. So that runs throughout the painting. It's more symbolic than, and I'm also not interested in terms of totally representational work, just looking at what is out there. And it's actually, when you perceive, when you experience the life around you, you internalize, and then you, as an artist, otherwise there's no difference between photograph and painting. And that is why paintings are so profound in comparison.
Well, there's something very arresting about a large picture or a fresco like we now have above Brixton Tube Station, with your figures, none of which are gazing at you as you look at the painting. There's a wonderful atmosphere conjured between the people staring in different directions out of your painting and the people rushing out of the tube, all of them staring in different directions, nobody looking at you. There's a really nice sort of synergy there.
I think that a lot to do with, again, Indian society, particularly in India, there is no space for like privacy, for example. The people have very busy and very, they collective like families and festivals and so on. But yet there is an element of total lack of privacy. And I think I wanted to highlight that aspect of life. They're very good collectively, and I think that was important. So also, and also people don't look at directly. I think it's like an Indian culture. It's like it's a not a good thing to do, or it's been rude to stare somebody, for example. But I think that also is part of probably unconscious kind of element which I've taken on board. Yeah.
So tell me how you came up with the subjects, the people that are in this fresco that's going to be above Brixton Tube Station for the next year.
When I came as a scholar, ever since I've lived in London, so London is like my home, and I have sort of length and breadth of London. So I wanted to represent mainly about London and Brixton. So there are many friends and family. Some of them actually pose for me in a number of figures. But at the same time, I think although we have like London is like a big place, at the same time we are quite individual in ourselves. We have our own. I think I always say that each individual is like an entire total entity in themselves. They also think about each individual like a walking book. You can write, a lot of books about one's experiences and lives. So I think that also been seen in the painting, which is although they are collective, all of them as a one painting, but there is also individuality and within themselves. But I also wanted to show about the life in London, like people jogging, cycling, the artists, like a dancer or model. During this pandemic, we have suffered so much. So I also wanted to show the resilience of people, that how London have suffered, and in spite with that, there's a huge kind of we have endured a lot, but there is always hope and thinking forward.
And the painting is called Endurance.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the colours that you used, because obviously you must have been concerned that this wonderful density of colour you get with your watercolour wouldn't come through in the vinyl that it has to be transformed into to go above a big, busy public tube station.
Yeah, I mean, that was my biggest concern initially. I think Lou's been wonderful in the sense that they did some test few, and so we had to change a few times and to get it right. But I was still concerned that the color will not come through, because I have had that experience in the past, and my paintings normally, it's very hard to really get correct reproductions. They never get it right. It's too dark, too light.
In photography?
Sorry?
Do you mean when they're photographed?
Yes,
yeah,
it did. So, but I think they've done a good job, and I'm very pleased that in spite of transferring on a vinyl, I think it's still retain a kind of quality with the painting. Yeah.
This mural is very much referring in some way to the mural that you were asked to paint in 1984 by the GLC. It's, in terms of like a big public artwork, it must be really nice to have that invitation come around again.
No, it's fantastic, and I'm very thankful to Art on the Underground, TFL. It's wonderful that they saw the work which I did in East London.
And it's still there. Out of the 4 murals that were commissioned in 1984, it's the one that's still there.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I think none of the other exists, so that's a wonderful thing. But that was a wonderful experience for me as well, like, working on a scaffolding 40 feet high and 30 feet wide. It was exciting and challenging, and I enjoyed that very much. And I would have loved to do the similarly mural in Brixton, to actually do it on the site. It's really exciting experience, and also engaging the local people while you're painting. That is a wonderful element.
You did do some sort of talks and workshops with local people, though, didn't you? Just to draw inspiration to hone your ideas for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I have visiting the Brixton quite a few times and talking to people. But I think when you're working and then you're interacting, it's different. Like I did in East London, for example, the local estate. I mean, people who are living in the building right across the wall, and it's wonderful that you talk to them and what do they think about it. And even now, I went recently there and talked to some of the residents there, and it's wonderful to have something brighten up, especially when the days are very grey. Yeah. So I think public art has its own role in public life, and I think it's important. Yeah.
But back in 1984, I mean, London was quite a sort of important place for public artworks, and especially this particular gesture, which was strongly anti-racist. And then it's interesting when I look at the artists who were working at that time. Lubena Himid also did one of the 4 murals, and I look at how artists who were really prominent in that time, like Sonia Boyce and Veronica Ryan, are now suddenly being reappraised and reappreciated fully. It kind of makes me wonder what happened in the interim. What happened in the 90s? Why did that sense of real engagement with all of London's communities, or all of Britain's communities, suddenly sort of fall off a cliff, it seemed, in terms of visual arts? Did you get a sense of that at the time? You must have done.
I did, in a way, because I think my work doesn't fit anywhere, and that's the problem. you have to fit into a kind of, criteria what they believe in. I have been invited by the Tate to, when they did a curated show called Watercolour in Britain. In spite of that, the Tate has came 3 times to my studio and no response of any kind. And I think the many institutions have ignored you many times, But I think if you are an artist and if you believe in yourself and believe, in your journey, I think that's what you do. You continue painting whether people, respond. And I think even today I've been ignored in many places. But, if you are, really, truly all about your work, because that is what matters most, then. And also I believe in terms of like consistency in your practice as well. So I think it's wonderful to see that a lot of artists now have been recognized. Veronica Reiner just got the Turner Prize, and it's fantastic. I spent a lot of time with in those 80s with Lubena and other artists as well. So that was fantastic. But I think you were always on the periphery. You could never,
The young British artists, the Damien Hirst, came along and sort of knocked the art world into a different kind of shape or a different sort of market, which prevailed for a long time. But there's also a really nice sense that painting is being reappraised, because for a while it was deeply unfashionable, I would imagine, to be a painter.
No, this is another thing as well, because I think last nearly 20, 30 years it's been just experimental work, and like you go to skip, pick up a few things and intellectualize, put it on the wall, and that's what has been happening. And it's a pity that young people who really, some of them very talented, been pushed aside. And I've recently been trying, teaching with the Goldsmith College. I was invited to do visiting tutoring, and I'm really amazed that young people doing some beautiful painting. Paint and brush, and canvas, and it's such a wonderful feeling that painting could return in a sense, because I think you cannot compare painting with anything else, no matter how amazing you think at the moment. Because I think we created a kind of fashion. Now video work is an easy option, in my opinion.
So have you been teaching at Goldsmiths?
I taught nearly 25 years ago, like Central St. Martin's, a number of colleges, but I think my work suffers as well. I love teaching, and that's my problem. So for 20 years I haven't really taught, but recently I think it was Louis's recommendation, I was invited to teach in Goldsmith, which I enjoyed very much. And it's also like visiting teacher, which I'm not very good at paperwork and all that, so it's wonderful to interact and work with young people. I always have enjoyed working with young people. I mean, I did a lot of work with like artists in residence, for example, and it's great that you take out 1 week out of your studio and spend time with the young people, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
You've had plenty of acknowledgement though as well. You've won portrait awards. You've been in the Royal Academy Summer Show, so you must have felt that encouragement was still there, that the recognition of your skills and talent was still there.
Yeah, I mean, it's always wonderful to feel that some people appreciate your work, and that gives you kind of energy in order to practice your work. But at the same time, when you think about it, a lot of people who you started with, they are all over everywhere, and you're still in the same place. But one does feel that. But at the end of the day, what really matters is like. You do your work, and also when working with young people, it's fascinating that you inspire them, and also help them to develop their own confidence in the kind of practice they do, and that is what lacking, I think, because last 20 years I think our institution has not failed to the students really, because they need learning, and learning hasn't taken place for 20-25 years, in my opinion. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful that, because you can't impose your idea to students. You got to come from their side, what they want to do and how you can help them to build their confidence, what they practice, and that is fundamental to teaching. Yeah. And that's why I enjoy teaching.
Yeah. You've got a wonderful website. I was familiarising myself with some of your earlier paintings, and there's one that really struck me from quite recently, which is much more overtly political than most of your work, and that's the Brexit painting, which is the white cliffs of Dover, although it looks like it could be Seven Sisters, and there's a man sort of looking out to sea, and I'm thinking that's a really interesting representation of Brexit. What was going through your mind then?
I have rarely painted political picture, but I think because Brexit has actually been in on and off for so long period of time, and I think you cannot deny certain things because kind of world you're living around, so you reflect and you respond to it. Not intentionally, but and I wanted to show showing the white cliff, and the big man is supposed to be Europe, and the little man is like
Right.
England. In my own personal kind of my personal way of expressing those kind of divisions and. It's a difficult, I think, those kind of subject matter when you're dealing with the political issues. I mean, I did similarly with the Grenfell Tower.
Yes.
I call it Grenfell Pyre and Rescued Family. It's like almost like a whole pyre been burnt, in the whole, and that should never happen in 21st century. So. And I met one of the family, which you see in the painting, and near a station just next day, and they were really traumatized. And normally I wouldn't paint about those things, but those the kind of experiences you have that actually compel you to respond in terms of your work, and that's what happened. So time to time I have painted those subjects.
So it's lovely to meet you and learn about your art. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.